I always describe myself as a Huckleberry Finn. Just running around barefoot, fishing, shrimping, crabbing, just getting into trouble. We actually had some neighbors that lived behind us, and they had some relatives who visited them from Louisiana, and there was a couple of boys. One was a little bit older than me, one was my age. These two boys and their father ended up fighting me and my older brother, and we got whooped. We got stomped because there's 3-on-2, and plus one of them's an adult. So we basically ended up running off into our house, and my dad just happened to be there. I was kind of expecting my dad at that point to, jump up and go over there and get this guy back, because that's the way we thought. He said, "What did y'all do to start it?" He basically put it back on us, and he didn't go defend us. I really remember vividly from that moment in my life saying, I got to take care of myself if anybody's going to take care of me. My life was all about me, and that ended up being my downfall. Growing up on the backside of that island without money and seeing the people on the front side on the Intercoastal Waterway with the yachts and the big houses, that was success to me. I knew that that's where I needed to go and where I wanted to be in my life. When I started to actually acquire those things, part of me was like, I need to be recognized by my family and friends for what I'm doing for them. When I didn't get it, I started to turn to people who would appreciate it. And I ended up, having a couple of affairs. There came a point, it was in 2006. Kathy and I had a lake house up on Lake Burton in the North Georgia mountains, and we agreed to meet up there to talk about what we're gonna do. And we went up there, and Kathy sat down in front of me and just looked me square in the eye, and she just said, "I release you. I don't need you anymore. I don't count on you for my happiness or anything else. I just release you. And, I have everything I need in Jesus Christ, and I don't need you anymore." I went out on my screen porch, and there was a little small book that was sitting on the table there. It's called God Works in the Small Things. And I was reading it, and all of a sudden I just put the book down, and I just looked up, and I just said, "Father, I can't do this anymore. I'm done." So I accepted Jesus Christ, and I probably sat there and wept for a half an hour, just uncontrollably. The small group in Living Waters is where the rubber met the road for me. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. Kathy saw a big change in me. We want to renew our vows, first of all, because I'm a new creation, and we need to get married again.
He matched me with you because you are everything that I'm not. He bound me to you so that I would be a son in his image and his likeness.
I'm overjoyed that God has given us a second chance for a new marriage and covenant. I'm so thankful that we didn't give up on each other, and most of all, that God didn't give up on us. I'm a 48-year-old woman, mother and grandmother, and I'm the most blessed woman in the world tonight because I am again marrying the man of my dreams, and I love you forever.
Okay, welcome once again back to our Christianity Exam and Experience. And before we move into our fourth presentation, just a quick recap. First of all, we looked at the uniqueness of Jesus in presentation 1 and the insights that surround his uniqueness that do distinguish him significantly from all other religious founders. In the second presentation, we looked at the initiative that God has taken toward us through Jesus and extended himself to us by revealing himself to us through the person of Jesus, so that God has revealed to us through him his desire for a relationship with us. And then thirdly, we looked at an in-depth reflection on the good news of the gospel. The good news of the gospel is that the person, Jesus, is the core of Christianity, In the core of Jesus' mission on this earth was not his life, but his death. And his death represents the key that unlocks the door to a relationship with God and to entering into the kingdom of God, which is now among us. Now, having presented the case for the uniqueness of Jesus, the trustworthiness of his word, and the good news of his gospel, it is now time to connect the dots. Time to connect the dots. The fourth and final presentation will spotlight the transformational power of a genuine, authentic faith in him. Faith connects the above truths about Jesus to the human heart and releases transformational power within it. Faith is the means whereby a person internalizes or buys into the gospel, through which Jesus becomes personal, and once Jesus becomes personal, it's the relationship with him that makes life transformative, and that faith is how a person experiences buy-in. Now, last week we said that the death of Christ is the heart of the gospel. Now, my question to all of you listening is this: what is your heart response to the heart of the gospel? To help you kind of get a feel for where you are in your journey and to kind of help you identify a little bit about what your spiritual address is now, I want to ask you a couple of questions. And the first question looks like this: if after you fall asleep tonight in your bedroom, you wake up somewhere else, how sure are you that you would be in heaven? How sure are you that you would be in heaven? And notice down at the bottom, we have this little continuum of 0% sure to 100% sure. And what I want you to identify is, what is your confidence level of certainty that you know that you can look toward in terms of your own eternal destination? How confident are you that you know where you're going and that you're comfortable where you're going? And you need, at least mentally, to put a little X on that continuum to identify where you would say you are. The next question is this: if you are confident that you would be in heaven, exactly what are you basing the hope of your salvation on? What are you basing that on? Again, a second diagnostic question. Lots of different possibilities here. I tried my best to please you. I lived by the golden rule. Many people say, well, I was a good person, never did anything really bad. I tried to love my neighbor as myself, even though it was easier at times, sometimes more than others. I did attend church faithfully. I loved and provided for my family as best I could. I lived an honorable life. I was a sincerely religious person. Or you might have some other answer that you would fill in the blank on that. Now, it's important to identify, again, what is the basis of your hope? What is the linkage between your hope of heaven and what you are judging to be the foundation upon which you're building upon? There is a clear linkage between these two, and you want to be able to answer that question. Now, what I want to move on from here is to talk to you about the idea of what it means to be saved and to be a Christian. And so, as I pointed out to you last time in the last session, the mission of Jesus, his identity was Messiah. His mission was to save. Jesus Christ are the two names that point that out. Now, when we use the word salvation, it's like the word gospel. Oftentimes it gets hackneyed and the true meaning of it is lost. In the same way that we talked about Jesus' central mission being his death and not his life, there's also a part of what it means to be saved or to have salvation that's often overlooked, and we're going to discuss that in this presentation. The word to save, yes, it can mean to be delivered from an imminent danger. It can mean that. But this word also, in the richness of the Greek language, not only means to rescue, but it means to heal. It means to heal. Very powerful, dynamic word. Now, it means to heal or to make sound. And it kind of suggests strongly that The idea of salvation means to put back what's broken. And once you put back what is broken, then the threat of an imminent danger is removed. So once healing takes place internally, the threat of an external danger is removed. We always tend to think of salvation as being rescued from the external danger and overlook the necessity of the healing on the internal side of us. That's what we're going to look at today. If the word to save means to heal, what exactly is the disease? To prescribe a treatment, you first have to identify the disease. A lot of times when we're not feeling well, we go to the doctor and we try to find out what's wrong. And the doctor does all of this analysis and comes up with a prognosis, and then a treatment plan is set in place. If you don't know what the disease is, it's going to be hard to treat whatever's going on inside effectively. So we first have to identify the disease. Now, I grew up in a religious background, went to parochial school for 8 years, was very active in the church that was associated with my childhood elementary school. I went to this same school through middle school in the 8th grade. And there were a few things, we had an hour-long religion class every morning, and there were a few things that I was taught that I remember. The first one that I was taught is that to err is human, but to forgive is divine. Now, the first part of the statement refers to the disease that the word salvation is referencing. And what this is saying is that it's human to swerve or to fall short or to move in a direction that's not the right direction, to move in the wrong direction. We just kind of do this naturally. We do this by nature. And in the same way that our tendency is to err, God's tendency is to forgive us. And I remember this is one of those things that you learn in childhood and you don't forget in adulthood. And that has always stayed with me. And the other part of this that I remember being taught, and when I first heard this, it was a little bit on the threatening side to me because it was kind of doomsday alarmist. And that is, our hearts are naturally inclined toward evil. And when I first heard that, I didn't like the sound of that. I thought of myself as a pleasant, nice kid who could stir up my share of mischief, but come on, I'm not anywhere close to Attila the Hun or Adolf Hitler. So what exactly do you mean by this? And as time went on, and as life went on, the truthfulness of this reality became very clear to me, and I understood exactly what they're talking about. And the best analogy I can give you is that if you're driving in a car and you take your hands off the steering wheel, how long before that car begins to swerve out of the lane that you're in? Not very long. And driving in the city of Atlanta and taking your hands off the wheel and eyes off the road, how safe would that be? It's because the car naturally swerves to the right and to the left. And so it has to have constant management and supervision. Now, in the same way that we manage the direction our car is going, and we keep it going straight so that nothing bad happens, we manage the sin nature that we have so that it keeps going in a constructive direction. But even though we can manage it, we cannot erase the tendency for it to be naturally inclined toward evil. We cannot erase that tendency. And so no matter how much we try, the gravity of our nature pulls us back in destructive directions. And that was the point of this religious instruction, which was really helpful once I began to understand it and to experience it. And let me assure you, by the time I got to be a teenager, I experienced the reality of that statement. Now, there's two other things I want to point you to, and we'll illustrate these a little bit. The first one is, when we use the word sin nature, what does the word sin mean? And then secondly, how does sin come into play in between God's perfection and our imperfection? And let's try to illustrate these in a way that you can understand. It's interesting that the term sin literally means to miss the mark. That is the intent of the word. That's the etymology of the word. In the image that you see up here is one of multiple attempts on the part of a person with a bow and arrow to hit the bullseye and failing miserably each time. Some were closer than others, but nonetheless, the bullseye was never really hit. And so when you think of doing things right before God, in heart, mind, soul, body, in speech, thought, deed, and action, we always manage to miss that in its entirety. In other words, we never do it totally perfect. We may say the right thing, but say it in the wrong way. Or we may say the right thing and then do it oppositely. There's that tendency to stray and to miss the mark. And the word literally means to miss the mark. And the mark, of course, is perfection as defined by God Himself. Not our definition of perfection, but His. And so by God's definition, our best efforts will always miss the mark. Now, looking at this image, what you see here is what I call the fatal gap. Down at the bottom, you see imperfection. At the top, you see perfection. And the gap between those two things is what the Bible refers to as sin. Wherever we fall short of perfection, that falls into the category in between perfection and all the way down to imperfection. And no matter what part of that continuum sin falls into, any imperfection, any act short of imperfection falls into the range of being sinful. So the gap between the two is called sin. That's how the Bible refers to it. And the Bible says we all have sinned, and the better way to translate it is we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. It doesn't say we have sinned, as I initially said. It says we sin, and so the word is in the present tense, which means as you're sitting here right now, sin is coursing through your veins. And that's what we have to contend with. So we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, which means we fall short of His glorious perfection. So our efforts always fall short down into this continuum at the bottom. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind is how easy it is for us to slip into our natural tendency and to do things that are not honoring to God. The Bible uses the word all extensively to not only to describe the Bible not only describes the problem of sin, but it uses a term that is universal that makes us know that sin is universal in nature. In Romans it says, all have sinned, all sin and fall short of the glory of God. In the book of Isaiah it says, all of us like sheep have gone astray. And in James chapter 2 it says, we all stumble in many ways. Notice that's Old Testament, New Testament, front and back, you see the word all that's woven throughout the Bible to emphasize the universal nature of sin. There are no exceptions to the rule. When I was in grade school and high school, I thought there were some people that just never sinned because they made straight A's, 4.0s, and did everything right. Eventually, though, when you got to know those people, you could see the marring of imperfection that came through even in their characters. And so sin is by nature universal. And there once was a book written in the 1920s called Whatever Happened to Sin? And I think it was written by a psychologist. And the book opens in the preface with a man standing on a street corner in Chicago with this black trench coat on, heavy sunglasses, and just has this ominous appearance. He's on a busy street corner and all kinds of people are rushing by in downtown Chicago. And he, at one point, just starts pointing at people in a very menacing way and utters one word, guilty, guilty, guilty. And see, in light of the universal nature of sin, how could he miss? How could he miss? He was right on target. And so to understand the serious nature of our sin, let's think of it like this. Do you think, or would you be comfortable estimating that your sin total per day is roughly about 3 sins a day? Can you get up to that level? I can do that before breakfast. Hopefully before dinner you can match me in that number. Now if you multiply that out, that's about 1,000 sins a year. And if you live to the normal lifespan today of early 70s, you're going to accrue to your account approximately 70,000 sins and stand before God and have to give an account of them. That's a pretty serious problem. Now, when you contrast that 70,000 sin number with how many sins does it take to keep you out of heaven? If you look at this circle, to step from inside the circle to outside the circle, you only have to do that at one single point. And in the same way that you can go from inside to outside the circle at one single point, you can go from perfect to imperfect with one single sin. I'm not making this up. The Bible actually says, whoever keeps the whole law and stumbles at one point has become guilty of all. So the law is like a circle, and if you step out of it at just one point, that's all that's necessary to categorize you in a whole different strata of not being perfect, but being imperfect. When I was in high school, I was arrested twice for possession of alcohol in a dry county. I was thrown in jail twice. How many offenses does it take to get thrown into jail? One. It happened to me twice in a dry county. And so just one offense, if one offense can remove you from that category of perfection, then how are we supposed to come to terms with the fact that we're looking at many, many, many thousands of sins, and as the slide illustrates, it only takes 1 point to step outside of the circle. Now tell me to what degree you can identify with this prayer. Dear God, so far today, I've done all right. I've not gossiped or lost my temper. I've not cheated anyone out of money or stared at a beautiful woman in the wrong way. I've not been grumpy or selfish, and I'm glad of that. I have not used any swear words, done anything really dumb, or acted in a way that embarrassed me or my family. I've not coveted anything that belongs to my wealthy next-door neighbor, including his Rolls-Royce RV and his Rolex watch. But in a few minutes, Lord, I have to get out of bed, and then I'm going to need all the help I can get. So you kind of get the point that each day kind of starts off really good. And then before we know it, we're in the ditch. And it's the gravity of our sin nature that pulls us in that direction. Now, it's been humorously stated that people by nature want to sit in the front of the bus, the back of the church, and be the center of attention. That is the best definition I've ever heard of what it means to have a sin nature. Now, if you're looking at this picture, you may be thinking to yourself, Dr. J, I hear what you're saying, but I just don't really feel this gravitational pull of my sin nature. Well, if you look at the picture of the iceberg here, what you see is that only 1/10 of the iceberg lies above the waterline. 9/10 is below the surface. 9/10. And it's the same way with our sin nature. John Calvin, the great theologian of the Reformation, said, we don't know the 100th part of sin that clings to our soul. We're like the iceberg. It's way below the surface. And you may also be thinking, well, you know what? I'm still not getting it. I'm still not hearing what you're saying because I feel like my life is generally okay. Well, you probably don't realize either that you're on a planet that's spinning on its axis at 1,000 miles an hour and is hurtling through space at 67,000 miles orbiting around the sun. Does it feel to you like the Earth is moving? It does not. When you stand between railroad tracks and you look down the distance, at some point it looks like they run together. Try walking to that meeting point and you'll find they never do. So you're not understanding the gravity of your sin nature is a problem of perception. It's an illusion. And so we have the picture here of the iceberg where so much of who we are and what we do lies below the surface, and we can lapse into a denial of our own sin nature and denial that we have a spiritual disease. And that in and of itself pilots people into further destruction rather than piloting them toward freedom. Martin Luther put it this way. He said, the recognition of sin is the beginning of salvation. The recognition of sin is the beginning of salvation. Years ago, an insightful follower of Jesus was asked to write an essay on the question, what's wrong with the world? And this is what he sent back. Dear sir, I am. Yours truly, G.K. Chesterton. Now that's brilliant insight. That's brilliant clarity. Because he exists, I am what's wrong with the world. Now, having stated the disease in as clear a way as I can, let's move from that bad news to some good news. And the Bible gives us this reason or this idea of good news by introducing to us this concept of salvation. Now, there's a verse in the Bible that states this so plainly. My wife Cindy was brought to the Lord through this verse. And the verse goes like this. It talks about how a person, since I'm talking today about the idea of salvation, let's look at how a person can be saved. What does the Bible say about it? Ephesians 2:8 and 9, it says, by grace you are saved through faith, not of yourselves, it's a gift of God, not as a result of works that no one should boast. Now we're going to unpack that verse in the remaining time we have in this presentation to try to best understand exactly what the Bible means when it talks about us being saved. Now notice that it says that the operative word here at the beginning of the verse is this concept of grace. Now in terms of the uniqueness of Christianity, grace is one of those realities in the Christian faith system that also points to its uniqueness. No other faith system mentions the idea of grace. Once in the last century, a man named C.S. Lewis, who was a brilliant 20th century English philosopher, he entered a room full of Oxford professors who were having a friendly debate over what makes Christianity unique. His response upon being asked his opinion was, "Oh, that's easy. Grace. That's easy." There is no concept of grace in any other religion except within Christianity. Where does grace find its origin? Listen closely. Grace finds its origin in the sacrificial death of Jesus, who through which he gave himself to atone for the problem of sin. God was so pleased by his death that it earned this vast, unlimited reservoir of favor that Jesus now makes that favor available to those who come to him for healing for their fractured relationship with God. Someone has put together an acrostic that goes like this: grace is God's riches at Christ's expense. God's riches at Christ's expense. That's what grace really is. Grace is the key word that we find here in the verse. And the word grace by definition, and it's always good to write this down because we have the hardest time remembering and internalizing and fully absorbing the full meaning of the word grace. The word grace by definition means God's unmerited favor extended to an unworthy object. God's unmerited favor extended to an unworthy object. So it implies here that we are saved by grace and that our being saved is something we do not deserve. And we will expand upon that in just a minute. Now, notice that the verse goes on to say, by grace you're saved through faith. Grace is the foundation that salvation is built upon. God extending this wonderful, unmerited, unlimited favor to unworthy objects. But there's an instrument through which that grace comes into your heart or enters your heart. Notice it says, by grace you're saved through faith. So grace is the foundation of our salvation, but faith is the instrument by which we are saved. Faith is the means by which we internalize this unmerited favor that God gives to us through the gospel. Now, the word faith is another one of those words that is often falls into hackneyed misunderstanding and misuse. So we're going to take the next few minutes and we're going to define this. Now, to understand faith, it has three components. The first one is knowledge. Faith always, or never rather, operates in a vacuum of knowledge. We always put our faith in something. And so knowledge is a part of faith in that you can't put your faith in what you don't know exists. You have to know something you have to think that something exists for you to put your faith in it. All right, secondly, there comes alongside of knowledge assent, or that is agreement. Agreement means that the knowledge you have of something, you are in agreement with that knowledge. For instance, if I said to you, "Hi, nice to meet you guys this morning, my name is Superman." Now, you have a knowledge of the proposition that I'm claiming to be Superman, but you probably won't agree with that. You're not agreeing with that knowledge that Dr. J is posing today to be Superman. So knowledge comes first, and then there is the buy-in idea of whether you believe that knowledge or not. And then thirdly, assuming that you do believe it, it comes to the third aspect of faith, and that's the idea of trust. So you can see these three letters, K-A-T, knowledge, assent, and trust. These three words make up the core of what true faith is all about. So what I want to do now is break these down into individual concepts so that you can see them more clearly. Because living in the Bible Belt, the deep southern part of our country, a lot of people are confused at just this point about what an authentic connection with God looks like. So we're going to walk through this. Let's start first with the core aspect, number one, of knowledge. Knowledge refers to mental or cognizant awareness. You are aware that a proposed reality exists. Notice that knowledge is a function of the mind. Is a function of the mind, the thought process or the thought processor that God gives to us to be able to come in contact with the reality around us and to be able to process that reality. So knowledge is awareness or cognizance, and it's a function of the mind. Now, notice that knowledge alone without assent or trust equals skepticism. Knowledge is a good start. It's the first step. But if that is all you have, you can't equate this with saving faith, and here's why. People that only have knowledge exist without any personal commitment to that knowledge. To possess the knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you've committed any part of yourself to the knowledge that you have. In other words, the Bible says that the demons believe in God and tremble. Demons believe in the existence of God, but they don't have any buy-in to that idea. Therefore, the idea of God does them absolutely no good. A person who has knowledge is someone who's not fully processed the knowledge that they have, and so by only having a knowledge of God without committing any part of themselves to that knowledge, they're actually engaged in skepticism. And when pressure is put upon that person, or when circumstances upset that person's lifestyle, you start to hear swear words, taking the Lord's name in vain, et cetera, and you begin to understand what's really going on inside of this person who might claim to believe in God but has no personal connection to God. They're really operating out of a subtle form of skepticism. That's what it amounts to. All right, the second aspect of faith is the assent part, and that's the agreement part. That's the part in which you do not have a particular problem with the idea of God. You might be comfortable with the idea that there is a God. And while this is a good start, it falls short of faith because assent is a function of the emotions. Knowledge is a function of the mind. Assent is a function of the emotions. Now, the word emotion is an interesting word. It refers to the nature of how we react to things. Your emotions are when something happens and then someone says, "How do you feel about that?" Your emotions tell you what your reaction is to what you've just experienced. So the function of emotions is it defines our reactiveness to a certain knowledge. Now, when you put emotions in the equation, if you have knowledge and assent, then you have knowledge and assent, but if it still doesn't have trust, you're still only at the place of ambivalence. You may have moved beyond skepticism, but you're still locked into a place of ambivalence because if you know something's true and you agree to it, but you don't entrust yourself to it, then what you're choosing to do is to hold yourself back from what you know to be real, and that creates a conflicted feeling inside. It creates a disconnect inside. Now, one of the reasons why people don't become Christians today, and I've spent several years talking to people, so I've had my share of private interviews. One of the reasons why people don't become people of faith is because they have a bitterness toward God. And if you have a bitterness toward God in your emotional core, you might have the idea of God roaming around inside of you, but you haven't fully embraced that God that you agree to be true because you have a bitterness toward Him. And bitterness and faith, or bitterness and a love connection, cannot coexist at the same time. So assent means that on an emotional level, we're okay with the idea of God, but knowledge and assent, still not having worked out or brought trust into the equation, at best equals ambivalence. And this type person who knows and agrees that there's a God, watch what happens to them when the pressure in life comes after them. When life falls apart, all of a sudden they fall apart, and a distance or their distant emotional reaction to the idea of God begins to come into play, and they go out and tie one on to get through their hard experiences, or they medicate their pain, or they do different things that keep them from really looking to God fully to get the help that they need. It's because they've got the knowledge and the emotional idea in minds, but the trust is not yet there. So let's move now to the trust piece, and this is where the third piece of faith is so important. The word trust is a very complicated word. Try to define that word and have a good time doing it. It refers to a number of different aspects, not the least of which is a reliance upon another or something outside of yourself. And it also refers to a confident, unwavering reliance. It's not a moody or a fickle reliance, but it's a consistent reliance. In the same way that knowledge is a function of the mind, assent is a function of the emotions, trust is a function of the will. It's a function of the will. Okay, so once we get the mind, the emotions, and the will lined up, then here's the equation. This is how the equation is fleshed out now. Knowledge plus assent plus trust equals faith. These three things lined up together, all these moving parts are now moving inside of a person in a cohesive direction, and they bind and bond the person to the idea of God. And as soon as these three things woven together like a threefold cord, as soon as those three things come together, they capture the heart of the person that is now claiming to be a person of faith. So we can have the first one without the next two, that's called skepticism. The first two without trust is called ambivalence, but all three together lined up, now you have what the Bible calls a true, abiding, transformative faith. And when all three aspects of a person's heart when you've got total person buy-in, that's what releases the transformational power of the gospel. It's the trust piece that it's built upon, and it either stands or falls there. When trust breaks down, faith disintegrates into a weak imitation that is anemic and powerless. And it's the trust front on the spiritual battlefield where the battle for true faith is either won or lost. Since the breakdown of faith almost always occurs in the trust aspect, let's take time to stop and define this a little bit further. Now here's where we want to go with this. We want a faith that operates here, and this is what we call all-in commitment. Now let me try to illustrate this for you in a couple of different ways. There is a story of a man named John Paton who left the comfort of England to go to the New Hebrides Island. And he went there to try to bring the good news of the gospel to a cannibalistic tribe. And so the courage it took for him to do this is remarkable, but he did that. And he didn't speak the language of these people. They didn't have a codified language. And so when he got there, he managed to establish a relational beachhead among the people. And then he decided that he was going to translate the Gospel of John into their language. But the first thing he had to do was he had to codify their language. And so when he started translating the Gospel of John, he couldn't find a word equivalent in their language for the word trust. I mean, in a cannibalistic society, trust doesn't exist. So he was equating faith with trust, and he needed a word that was the dynamic equivalent of trust. Could not come up with it. So one day he was in his home, and he's sitting in a chair, has both feet on the ground, and all of a sudden it kind of dawns on him to lift his feet up out of the chair in this motion. And he turns to his servant and said, "Give me a word for what I'm doing right now." And the servant gave him a word which meant to fully lean upon, which is what he was doing in the chair. He was leaning his whole weight upon the chair. And so he took that word and substituted it into his translation of the Gospel of John and was able to adequately communicate the idea of true saving faith, which is knowledge, assent, and trust, resting your entire weight upon Jesus and what he's done for us. Beautiful analogy. Another story that is similar, the story of a man named Blondin who was a high wire performer. Now, if you want to read some mind-bending stuff, you should read about this man. He was a daredevil and did just things that are inconceivable. Let me share a little of those with you. He once made his way to Niagara Falls and was able to string a high wire all the way across Niagara Falls. And then daily, at a certain time of the day, I believe it was, crowds would show up and he would entertain them on his high wire. And one day he got up and he put a blindfold on and walked all the way across the high wire and back, blindfolded. One day he actually did this. He took up some type of apparatus with him out across the falls on the high wire, cooked an omelet and ate it, and then came back and put his feet on dry ground. One day he pushed a wheelbarrow across, came back and said, "Anybody think I can put a sack of potatoes in it and push it across?" And everybody said, yeah, you can do it. So he puts a sack of potatoes in, pushes it across and back. And he comes, when he finally gets back over, he says, "How many of you think I can put a person in this wheelbarrow and push them across and back?" And of course, everybody was, "Yeah, you can do it." And he turned to this one guy who was a duke from England and said, "Would you like to get on the wheelbarrow?" And the guy graciously declined. And he said, "Anybody else want to get on the wheelbarrow?" Nobody accepted his invitation until a few seconds later when a lady, an older woman, walks out, gets in the wheelbarrow, and he pushes her over and across and back. Guess who that was? His mother. His mother. She was the only one who totally trusted him. She was the only one who was committed to, in mind, will, and emotions, the fact that her son could do that. Now that is what true faith looks like. And when faith of the mind, the heart, the emotions, and the will, when that's all connected into Jesus, that is what opens the gateway for transformational power to begin to take place. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, I know I've got the sin problem, but I'm really not that bad. And when I compare myself to others, I know I'm probably better than most. I think God will grade on a curve and I'm in the upper echelon. Well, for you to fully understand your need of faith in mind and will and emotions, let me illustrate it for you like this. Let's suppose we all went and stood on the coast of California and decided we were going to swim to Hawaii, 2,300-mile journey. And there's a lifeguard standing up behind us, and he blows a whistle. And as soon as the whistle blows, we're all supposed to jump in the water and start swimming. Now, some people would hardly get away from shore without drowning because they don't swim. Amateur swimmers might get 100, 200 yards. Trained swimmers might make it 2 or 3 miles, and professional swimmers might make it 50 miles. But in the end, they're all going to drown if they try to swim to Hawaii, because no matter how far they try, that distance is just too great. So in other words, relative to the efforts of each other, some swimmers could say, well, I swam further than you did, but relative to the 2,300-mile destination away, no one gets even close. And that's where we all are in our sin nature. Some of us are better than others, or at least we can put on a better veneer than others, but ultimately we're all at the same place, and that is, relative to the destination of perfection, none of us will get even close. So what we're trying to get to, again, is this place of realizing that it is faith that brings the heart fully into that authentic connection with Jesus and causes us in our relationship with Him to begin to experience the ring of authenticity. Now notice this verse, which was written about people in the Old Testament. And here's what it says when you lack true saving faith. It says, "Indeed, we've had the good news preached to us just as they did." They were the people in the Old Testament. "But the word that they heard didn't profit them because it was not united by faith in those who heard." Now notice that the gospel, or the good news, that Jesus died on the cross from your sins, minus faith, when it's not united, when it's not internalized in the heart by faith, is of no use. Faith is the instrument that brings the good news into the heart and makes it personal and real. So comes a point in which we have to kind of move beyond what we know and begin to lean into what we know for faith to begin to root itself and take hold of the person. Now, let's just go on to define a little bit further. We said in the last session, forsaking all, I trust Him. This is what true faith is. And notice the word trust is the key word in that acrostic. Now, let's talk for just a minute about the idea of good works. If we put our faith and trust in Jesus, and He is able to save us to the uttermost, purely based upon His efforts, does that give me the license to live any way I want once I put my trust in Jesus? In other words, can I plan on going to heaven and then go out and live like hell and expect to get there? Well, no, you can't think in those terms, because the Bible tells us this, and if you'll just make a note of this, just write this down so you understand it. The Bible says we're not saved by good works, but it does say we're saved unto good works. We're not saved by good works, we're saved unto good works. And let me try to give you a couple quotes here just to reinforce that once we become Christians and put our total trust in Jesus, now we do live lives that are honoring to Him out of a motive of gratitude, not because those good works have any meritorious value, but simply because they're not the grounds of our salvation, but the proof. Good works are not the grounds of our salvation, but the proof. If I suddenly fell over here, somebody would probably walk up here, if not my wife who's a nurse, and what would she do? She would check my pulse. All right, what does the pulse tell you? It tells you that the heart is beating. There's no life in a pulse. The pulse is an indicator that the heart of life is still pumping. So good works is like your pulse. It's not the heart that drives your salvation. A love for Jesus, a faith in Jesus is what drives your salvation, but the pulse of your faith is good works. It's an indicator. Another way of thinking of it is we're not saved by our good works, but we're saved unto good works, which I just mentioned to you. And then thirdly, kind of looks like this. Faith plus good works does not equal salvation. Faith equals salvation, which equals good works. One is a natural byproduct of the other. If you want to use another analogy, good works are not the root of our salvation, but they are the fruit. Now, if good works is essential in our journey, then what's the motive for that? The motive for it is gratitude. Why do we do good works? Not for meritorious reasons, but for reasons of gratitude. Jesus did it all so that we could have it all. And of course, once we grasp the implications of that, that should cause gratitude to well up within our hearts toward Him. So out of a motive of gratitude, out of an attitude of gratitude, we do good works. And here's a couple quotes that may help you. Our acceptance by God does not depend upon what we've done for Him, but upon our acceptance of what He's done for us. If we could get that wedged into the minds of people, the impact of that would result in millions and millions, many professing Christians entering into the kingdom of God. And then lastly, another quote in regards to good works. Grace, not good works. A person comes to God out of need, not by a showcase of their deeds. A person comes to God out of need, not by way of a showcase of their deeds. That is a simple, straightforward way to put it. Now, the question we were trying to answer when we began was this. What does it mean to be saved? It means to be healed. It means to be healed of the fracture, the brokenness in our relationship with God. How is a person saved? Not by good character and not by good performance, but we're saved by grace, and the instrument through which that occurs or through which that is applied to the human heart is a true, genuine faith made up of knowledge, assent, and trust. mind, emotions, and will. It's a total person commitment to the idea of God's being committed to you through his death on the cross. So in conclusion, only when a person's fractured relationship with God has been graciously healed through confident belief in and unwavering reliance upon Jesus, the great physician whose death on the cross sufficiently secures eternal security, can it be said that a person is truly saved. Let me read it again. Only when a person's fractured relationship with God has been graciously healed through confident belief in and unwavering reliance upon Jesus, the great physician whose death on the cross sufficiently secures our eternal security. Only when our trust is in him and him alone can it be said that a person is truly saved.